Hello, ladies and gentlemen. DOTPF has come upon us once again, and inevitably, people don't really like it. Now, DOTPF, at least for me, was a little bit of a miserable time, and a lot of people are also having a bit of a miserable time with it, and today I'm going to show you why that may be the case. First, before we get into anything, this isn't a doom post about how DOTPFs are like unclearable or anything. There's definitely a lot of ways you could go around it still. You could use the good old-fashioned brute force units that are so good at PF that they don't necessarily really care that much about the blessing, like for example Jade, really showing her value here because the blessing just isn't too good for many characters that she still does well in it. You also have Himiko, of course, and then you have Yunli's counters, which is consistently blast, so she keeps consistently pulling up the enemy, so that's very good. And you have Akron teams who doesn't really get that big of a boost from the blessings, but if you have someone like Lingsha or Aventurine, those out of turn attacks do give her more stacks, so that's nice. So yeah, there's definitely a couple of ways around DOT Pure Fiction. It's a lot better than the last time. You have a lot more options this time, believe me, so that at least that's good. But DOT does not feel good every single time it came back. So let's analyze it, right? Why is DOT so bad in Pure Fiction? DOT and Concept actually shouldn't be any worse than counter teams in Pure Fiction. They kind of run into the same problems. DOT's only real problems are its effect hit rate and its application issues, and sometimes it's a little bit squishy, but with the right sustain it doesn't really matter that much. And in recent times they have released DOT units that just don't care about EHR requirements or convert it into a useful stat like attack, or they just don't care about application at all, and then when the enemy enters the wave, there they just have the DOT. There's definitely issues that have been fixed over time, but it really isn't enough, and there lies the issue. The real problem of DOT in Pure Fiction has really nothing to do with Pure Fiction as a game mode itself, but because DOT has so many problems that has to be fixed, that DOT is such a niche archetype and not many people own it. Why is DOT not popular? Why is this really a problem? Because DOT has multiple problems, they have really low value and not many people own them, right? The first of this and the most obvious one is that DOT sure is expensive. If you want any shot of running DOT as your main source of damage, you have to use Kafka, who is a limited unit. Everything else is such a strict downgrade that you would be advised to run a really Frankenstein team of using Bootil instead of Kafka, and chances are it might actually work better. Hello everyone, Wave from the future here to give you the simulations that prove what I'm saying here to be true. Now, I made a bunch of simulations on Asagi, and I do want everyone to point out that Asagi isn't 100% correct, and you have to look really closely at the battle simulation because sometimes the AI just doesn't get it right, and you may have to adjust some certain things, but regardless, it's good enough for these kinds of small scale comparisons. Now, the Firefly Super Break team, which came out at first in my simulations, had a DPA of 6602. It didn't even use E0S1 Lingsha, it only used Firefly E0S1, Ron May E0S1, Harmony Trailblazer E6 with Memories of the Past. Yeah, that's it. It's a 4-cost team essentially because you only have Firefly, her signature, Ron May, her signature. So 4-cost team, it went up ahead against all these teams. The second team that came up is Yunli with March 7th and has Robin as the support, Aventurine, all the 5 stars are E0S1. Of course, March 7th is E6 with a swordplay. And this came up with a DPA of 5,596, a 6-cost team. So, you know, it's more expensive than Firefly Super Break with a little bit less results. The next is Kafka DOT, which used a Ron May variant with Black Swan, used Lingsha too because Lingsha actually outdamages Huohuo because of her Fire Break, which ended up with a DPA of 5,222. This is an 8-cost team. It's a team full of 5 stars with their signatures, so it's an 8-cost team. It's the most costly team so far, and it still didn't out DPS Yunli with March 7th and Firefly with Super Break. And the next team that came up is free-to-play Acheron, which used a Benaifen E6 and Pela E6 variant, which makes it a 4-cost team because I'm using, Aventurine in the simulation with his signature, which ended up with a DPA of 4,381, this is around the ballpark of actually good free-to-play teams at this point. And the next team that came up is Kafka DOT, but not using Black Swan, using Benaifen, and using Ron May as a support, which is a 6-cost team, and it still didn't beat the free-to-play Acheron team with a DPA of 24,116. It cost 2 more, and it didn't even, and it didn't even beat the free-to-play Acheron team. The last team with the lowest result is Kafka DoT with Gwenaifen, but instead of having Lingsha, she is completely removed, so it's a 4-cost team, which ended up with a result of 3,773, the worst of the simulations. So DoT really scales well with more investment and more cost, but even with more cost, they struggle to really beat other teams that don't have as much cost as them, which is kind of crazy and shows you the state of DoT as we know it. Anyway, back to the normal video. And it's not like you have a wide selection of DoT units anyway. There's only like 6 DoT units, and only 2 of them don't have annoying uptime problems that cuts them off with pure fiction. So there's just not that many characters. Compare it to an actual meta archetype, like let's say Follow-Up. Follow-Up did it much better because they released a follow-up character for free, twice. One of which was limited, and the other was so flexible in every other team archetype that they weren't just shackled to follow-up attack teams the entire time. And previously, they already had Clara, Jingyuan, Topaz, Blade, E4, Bronya, whatever. Chances are you were already built for the follow-up attack archetype before you knew it. Because follow-up attack units weren't homogenized to only be viable in double follow-up teams and could be used for hyper carry. Well, I guess except for Topaz. While DoT was something you had to deliberately pull for only for that one team, which I think leads to the biggest issue. DoT's archetype is best utilized when there are more DoT characters in the team. They made DoT so insular and so focused on this function that any DoT unit in an archetype that isn't DoT starts to actively fall apart. Like, imagine this, right? Imagine you're using Sampo in any other team that isn't DoT. That's awful. Kafka might as well be a slightly stronger Serval or somehow a worse Jingyuan. The only DoT characters with use seen outside of the DoT umbrella is Jiao Cho and Gwenaifen, and those two aren't being looked at for their own DoT damage at all. And considering other archetypes have harmonies as superior options, you kind of have a Geo situation in Genshin, where DoT as a damage archetype is only good amongst themselves, which makes pull value very iffier when you have units like Kafka or Black Swan. Even if Kafka and Black Swan were good, you probably aren't pulling just for one team. Another way that DoT is so isolated and really shows how bad bias to it can be is because of how it functions with blessings. If you have a break blessing or break bias, then it's usually fine because any character can break anyway, and pure fiction actively wants breaking anyway, so you're probably just building that. The problem with a DoT blessing is there's very limited ways you can interact with DoT outside of a DoT unit itself. Sure, the blessing gives every enemy attack the DoT, but 99% of the roster cannot get anything significant with a DoT. Only Kafka and Sampo do. We've learned past 1.0 with characters like Himeko and Hook that giving someone a DoT without a party member to interact with it makes it really useless. And because DoT multipliers is so tiny, it doesn't even matter anyway. If Burn detonated with just any fire unit or Shear with any wind unit, then it would find itself in a lot more teams as a mono enabler and fix numbers at the same time. But the fact that a certain DoT can only really interact with at most 2 units in the entire game, one of which is limited, means DoT units are worse in nearly every situation by the existence of harmony units. Yeah, gee, no wonder why nobody wants to pull DoT units, and the only reason that they wish they did is when Pure Fiction's strict character check really sells them. The dilemma here is that DoT is not worth the price at the current moment. A lot of sensible people decided because DoT just performs worse than any other team and has problems in nearly every scenario, that you might as well not pull for them. Pure Fiction deciding to make a DoT check makes people feel like they're punished for building teams that are stronger. And because there's no DoT banner, you have no exit from this pain and have to deal with it on your own. And even if you do have an exit like a Kafka banner, people will still have reservations because unless it's Jiao Cho, you can't really be sure on them being used in other teams, making their future investment dubious. It's a feedback loop of people feeling really bad, not wanting to pull for something that isn't meta, and having a miserable experience because of it. Anyway, that's all for today. I don't know if this is like a hot take or anything, but yeah, those are my thoughts on DoT Pure Fictions. I sure hope they never try to do this again unless they like actually make a DoT character to sell it, but yeah. I'll see you later. Bye bye.